3, 2, 1.
Buy stuff through our greenmangaming.com referral link and win my love. And also a great deal on a video game. That helps too, I hope. I'm not really feeling it today, but I finally got this done. There's gonna be okay. Fair warning, there's gonna be a lot of pain during this video. I definitely shouldn't have decided to record a video on the day we set the clocks forward for daylight savings. Ugh. You know how it is. So anyway, I'm a little bit out of it. However, I finally cracked the code. And I couldn't wait to talk about it, so here we are. You may recognize this as, well, we've been using it for the last several episodes, and honestly, this is our spaceship. This is the Pegasus. The Pegasus is now sporting the Pinnacle engine, but if you guys tuned into the end of the last video, you will know that the Pinnacle is the most... well, it's the most efficient, but it's not exactly the fastest. So I was crunching the numbers. The original plan was to completely remove this engine and just get a new one, which didn't really pan out the way I wanted it to. We're not exactly getting a new engine. This is the most efficient engine we will ever be able to achieve, unless we put a fuel dump on board, which I'm not gonna do. Because as it stands right now, this thing gets 21,000. I have to emphasize that number by talking like that. 21,000 meters per second delta V. To put that in perspective, the hardest thing to achieve in this game is low orbit around the sun, which would take 7,990 meters per second delta V. Basically 8,000 meters per second. Round trip, double that. 16,000. This has enough fuel to go low orbit around the sun and come back to low Kerbin orbit and still have enough fuel to make it low or to make a trip out to the moon. In fact, enough to make a round trip out to Minmus and still have a tiny bit left over for maneuvering. How long is that going to take? Forever. It's going to take forever. This is the least powerful engine we have. We tested this on an ion engine, on the, no, it wasn't an ion engine. It was a after credits thing that we did where we tried out the Too Smart Ion, which was an ion-powered Too Smart rover, which, you guys may remember had so little thrust that we hit the brakes and the thing actually started slowing down. We fired the rover's monopropellant engine in reverse. It actually started going backwards. It's that inefficient. To get down to low Kerbin orbit would have taken hours. And we're already here, which is insane. So I started thinking, well, we have time acceleration. But when the engine is firing, that can only go up to ×4. There are mods out there that would allow us to go faster, but at that point, we risk tearing the ship apart, which we do not want that. This has more parts than any other engine. This is we're trading power for sheer efficiency. Also, we're trading my goddamn motherboard's integrity for sheer efficiency. I say that because it's going to melt the CPU, which will melt through the motherboard, and just this molten slag that is becoming my motherboard by having to run this machine. Look at this frame rate. So time acceleration was out. So finally, I went into the game files. Now this is the closest thing I could do. This is the closest we could get to cheating without actually cheating. Some of you may remember we already used our veto. Actually, we used that last year. We have a new veto. Now, technically, this doesn't fall under the veto. I raised its engine output by 100 times and its fuel consumption by 100 times. So basically, it's the same engine, just 100 times faster. So that is why we have the math down at the bottom of the screen that you see now. Going into map view here, you can see we have a periapse that's just above the Satellite of Love's orbit. It's not exactly near Celestia 2, but it's the Satellite of Love. This is the best we could do. Now, the main issue we still have is our ability to fire this engine with efficient electricals in mind. Now, this thing is sporting an absurd amount of radioisotope thermoelectric generators. 8 up here, and 16 times 2, 32 underneath this structure right here. And there's probably a few more on here, I'm not entirely sure. There are, however, a few probably hanging out on the main hull of Pegasus. Probably around the tool shed. Most definitely around the tool shed. Probably inside the toolbox. Yeah, I think I could see a few in there, but the center of mass right now is really bad, and this is the best we could get. Are the lights on? Well, now they're on. Yikes. Yeah, there are a couple in there, but it's not exactly going to keep these things running. Now, one thing that I wasn't sure whether or not I should do... I think this resets the camera. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that did it. One thing I wasn't sure if I should do was increase the electricity consumption by 100 as well. Which, right now, in this version, I didn't do that. Let me pull up this thing's engine stats real quick. Right now, this thing is sporting a maximum thrust of 200 from its original 2. Its xenon gas consumption was a ratio of 0.1. Multiplied that by 100, now it's times 10. Its electrical drain was 1.8 per second. Now, Pegasus sports an enormous battery array of 11,000. Knowing this, if we were to raise that by 100, we would be looking at a battery drain of an absurd 180. Now, we're pulling out our calculators trying to figure that out. With 11,000 battery life, but let's actually round that out to our actual number that we have, which is 11,080, divided by 180 per second. We're getting 1 minute of engine. Just over a minute. 61.5 seconds of engine firing. Now, I prefer not to drain the entire battery on this thing. That'd be nice. So, I'm gonna let you guys make up your own mind about that. This is mostly an episode of me talking about the math, which is why nobody else is here. I was hoping we could get a recording done tonight where we're actually discussing the statistics of this move that I have decided upon. But as it stands right now, this is an ion engine that is 100% faster with 100 with okay, it's not 100%. That's basically double. It's 100 times more powerful with 100 times the fuel consumption. But I'm still not sure about the electrical charge of it. Do we raise its electrical consumption to times 100? Because there's no way these solar panels are going to keep up with that unless we raise the stats of these solar panels by 100. But at that point, what else do we need to raise? Do we need to raise the monopropellant output by 100 and the monopropellant consumption by 100? Like, if that is also the case, do we also raise the radioisotope thermoelectric generators? So that instead of 1, they're charging the ship by an astonishing 100? And not even that, we'd have to reset all the stats for the lander. Because there's no way I want to do the same thing with the lander. Right now, it's just xenon gas that is being affected by this. These tanks, their stats have not been raised at all. None of the fuel tanks have been modified in any way whatsoever. So they're not carrying 56,000 liters of gas, which would be ridiculous. But at that point, we're just adding weight. Now, originally, I was going to replace this engine. I started looking at atomic rocket motors. Everyone says use the atomic rocket motors. But if you guys were paying attention to our mass relay missions, or at least the early ones, you may have noticed it, but I didn't realize it at the time. The NERV engine, the atomic rocket motor, no longer consumes oxidizer. Oxidizer is no longer required to run that engine, which means there is a very select number of fuel tanks that are truly compatible with that engine. I'm talking fuel tanks that are designed only to carry liquid fuel. Because as it stands right now, for example, we have one on board right now. We have a lot on board, actually. It's up here. This is technically a fuel tank. It has a tiny bit of liquid fuel in it and a tiny bit of oxidizer, which honestly I could probably dump that and we'd get a tiny bit more thrust to weight out of this vessel. There's a little bit more here as well. We could probably dump that and get just the tiniest bit more efficiency. I'm pretty sure we can vent fuel now. I'll have to figure out how to do that. I think I already found it. Oh wait, this is just transferring the damn fuel around. We need a way to just drain the fuel. And right now we don't have that. At least not that I can find. But anyway, this tank, for example, uses liquid fuel and oxidizer. We don't want that oxidizer. We just want the liquid fuel. Now, there are very few tanks that actually do that. Most of them are compatible with air breather jets, which I don't need to tell you guys that there is no air in space. Which means we don't want oxidizer at all. Now, we can take the absolutely massive fuel tanks of the Eagle Heavy or the God Rocket, drain all the oxidizer out, and just send them up with liquid fuel, but then we're just wasting space. If we could get fuel tanks that large, we would be standing on Elu by now. Because if we could just replace the oxidizer with liquid fuel, that would be the best thing, the most efficient way to actually get to where we need to be without cheating. Though, as it stands right now, this is the best we could do. We're coming up on a maneuver node right here in another 19 minutes, or at least what the game considers 19 minutes, which is incredibly slow given the frame rate. That's pretty much nothing we can do to fix the frame rate unless we lower some of these settings. We could lower the anti-aliasing down to ×4, maybe get a little bit better performance out of it. I don't want to lower the textures at all. Maybe cut the shadow cascades in half. Lower a couple other things. Yeah, see, that's coming in a little bit better. It's not exactly great. Look at the timer. 56. 55. 54. Yeah, see, it's not great. It's not perfect. It's probably never going to be perfect. This is an over-engineered vessel to begin with. I mean, look at the arm that we have now. I absolutely wanted an arm on this thing, but one thing we don't have still is our ore refinery. We have ore tanks on board, but no ore refinery. My ultimate goal was eventually to be able to mine asteroids and convert that to fuel, and off we go. We'll probably never have that. Unless we have an attached module somewhere. I don't know where that attached module would be. At least, there's nowhere on board that would make it aerodynamic enough. And by aerodynamics, I mean center of gravity, of course. But anyway, enough of me talking. Let me show you guys the remarkable efficiency that is the new and improved Pinnacle engine. This is us burning at periaps here. If we spin her around very carefully, the ship is still extremely scary when she spins. Get her darken around. We could turn the lights on in the cockpit at least. There's only one person on board. Charlie is up there right now. Charlie, the engineer. She's designed for a crew of 7, like the space shuttle. She's just massively inefficient. Now, one thing that I actually didn't take into account is that if we did raise the electricity consumption of the ion engine by 180, I just realized that we would have to multiply 180 times 12 for the entire engine array, which gives us a grand total of 2160 megajoules of electric drain per second. Now, if we take our 11,080 and divide it by whatever that number was, you get the idea. We're looking at seconds of burn time. A few seconds. Let me show you what I've been working on. This is the newly modified engine stats, and we're going to be keeping an eye on the electric charge stats at the same time. And here we go with a perfectly timed burn. Perfectly timed. This is the electric drain on the system. We have a burn time of 11 seconds here. The ship is extremely stable right now, which is good. But you can see, even here, we're looking at 78, 79, around that range of electric drain per second. Xenon gas is even worse off. We're draining at about 582 per second. But that's because the drain on each one is 10. Which doesn't really make a whole lot of sense math-wise. But here we are at her new orbit of... let me see here. Her new orbital altitude of 204,000 meters. 204.5 thousand. Which is quite a lot. What is that? What is that? There's the Kerbal Space Center. But what the hell is that? We may need to get a jet out there. I'm not entirely sure what that is. Is that a city? We did just get a recent update to the game. There's another one. There's things reflecting... This looks like mountain ranges. Anyway, with the engine off, we have an engine charge increase of about 30. With the lights on, that might be a little bit less. And we are turning the lights on. And here we go. Let's just go ahead and have this thing assist with stability control instead of anything else. But with that 20,000 meters per second of delta V, we could go anywhere. Literally anywhere. Anywhere we desire, it is within our grasp. I'm probably going to write a great big speech when we actually burn this engine off to leave the Kerbin system. The hardest planet to get to is Moho. Moho, to get to low orbit, requires 7,640 meters per second of delta V. Low orbit around Kerbal is just a little bit higher than that. Now, low orbit to the surface of Moho requires 1,000, and then back up is another 1,000. Which means we need to design an efficient lander that will get us there. Something that can actually land and take off again. One of the planets I am it's a moon. One of the moons I am extremely interested in getting us to is Lathe. Lathe has an atmosphere, but it's very difficult to land on it given the gobs and gobs of water that dot the surface. Then there is the Eve mission. To get from the surface of Eve to low orbit around Eve requires 10,000 meters per second delta V. Which is absurd. It's absurd. I'm trying to think of intuitive ways to figure that out, but it's not exactly going well. What we're gonna have to do for that mission is the landing segment of that mission will have to go to Eve on its own and then land, and then Pegasus will fly by later to pick them up. But I'm thinking, now, here's an idea, you might like this. If we were to make that a dual mission, like 2 objectives at once, we could also do the moon of Eve. Gilly is the smallest moon in the Kerbin system. Now, if Pegasus were to bring its own lander and go to Gilly, that would only require 3,390, basically, let's round that out to 3,400 meters per second delta V, if we wanted to get from low orbit Kerbin to low orbit Gilly. Now, low orbit Eve to low orbit Gilly is another 3,000. So let's do some math here. If we go low orbit Kerbin to low orbit Eve, that is 1,780 meters per second delta V. Then if we go from low orbit Eve to low orbit Gilly, we add another 3,000. Wait, crap, I didn't clear out the last calculation. Wait. Okay, so 1,780 plus another 3,000, which is we're already at 4,780. Now we go from low orbit Gilly to low orbit Eve, which is 470 meters per second delta V. Yeah, most of that burn is you slowing down. Now, us going from Gilly back to Eve would be us picking up our guys from the surface of Eve, which means they're going to need some space to maneuver. That, or Pegasus can do the maneuvering, because at this point we've only burned basically 1/4 of our fuel, which is nuts. Anyway, so then we have to get from low orbit Eve to low orbit Kerbin. So we go ahead and we add 2,220 meters per second delta V, which gives us a grand total of 7,470 meters per second of delta V, which is not even half of our fuel. Now that's not accounting for the weight of the lander, which will probably shave, I'm gonna round that out at about 2,000 meters per second delta V. Which we need a lander to get to the surface of Gilly, which means the Eve landing will be an entirely separate mission, but when Pegasus goes out there, it will carry the Gilly lander. Now, the Gilly lander, we basically don't even need to engineer that. You can land on Gilly with anything. Pegasus can probably land on Gilly. Like, Pegasus in its entirety can probably land on Gilly. Now, granted, we are not doing that. That is a bad idea, and we will never... Pegasus will never land. That is a fact. But to get from low orbit Gilly to the surface of Gilly, you only need 30 meters per second delta V. 30! 30! Not 300, not 30,000, you need 30. A Kerbal with their jetpack can do that. It is entirely possible to do that. Now, we could basically throw something at the surface of Gilly, and it wouldn't even need to fire its engine, and we'd probably still have some things intact. It's like landing on Minmus. Low orbit Minmus to surface of Minmus. That's sea level Minmus. Minmus has a pretty obvious sea level. In fact, I think that's Minmus out there right now as we speak. Yes, I do believe that dot, that little black dot right there, is Minmus. Whether or not you can actually see that, that's beyond me. Your YouTube compression is killing you right now. But anyway, to get from low orbit Minmus to the surface of Minmus is 210 meters per second delta V. Yeah, it's really small. And Gilly is smaller than that. There are other small moons out there like Joule's Bop. Bop requires 260 meters per second, which is just a little bit higher than Minmus. Pole is probably the second the second easiest thing to land on in the game because pole only requires 150 meters per second delta V. Now, the problem is Tylo. Now, low orbit to the surface of Tylo is 2,610 meters per second delta V. Tylo is the densest body in the Kerbal system without an atmosphere. Except for maybe Elu, which I am checking now. No, Elu is actually quite easy at 710. Tylo is just extremely dense, which means its gravitational pull is enormous. Oh, look at that. Look at that beautiful sun. If you guys are still looking at the video, this is really one of those videos where you can just turn the video on and go make a sandwich while I talk about the math. Fun stuff. Fun stuff. That's the wrong way to turn. Turn the ship this way. Keep her turning. Just let her turn. Just let her drift. Let her drift turn. We won't be burning any power that way. Easy now. Slow her down. Slower. You see those struts wobbling? She's not the most structurally stable thing, but what do you expect for something that's literally held together by these little strut pieces? These things are just the solar array! Anyway. Now, from the surface of Tylo to low orbit Tylo is another 2,610 meters per second delta V. So 2,610 times 2 means we need a lander that can do 5,220 meters per second, which is unheard of on an efficient lander. Ooh. That lander's gonna have to be really beefy. And then it's probably gonna need another, I want to say 500 just to be safe. Another 500 meters per second delta V to get us to get us back to Pegasus. So 5,720, which is insane. This is an insane plan. Tylo isn't even the last moon I'm worried about. Val requires 990 meters per second. Now, to put things into perspective, the mun over there, requires 670. Which means everything we're doing right now requires more effort than the mun. Duna, from low orbit to the surface, requires nothing. But from the surface back up is 1,960 meters per second. Which means that our current lander configuration isn't going to help much. Now, our current lander can land on most things in the Kerbin system. Low orbit to the surface of Val? Yeah, probably. Low orbit to the surface of Bop and back? Absolutely. Why not? Pole? Forget about it. We could do that easy. Elu? Yeah, probably. We could probably do that. Drez? Yes, we could do Drez. We could do Drez all the Drez long day. In fact, we're probably going to Drez next. Even though nobody gives a shit about Drez. Everyone wants to go to Lathe or Duna or Eve. Or Tylo. They only want to do the hard stuff. Or Elu. Other stuff like that. It's crazy. It's out of control. All these other planets that nobody appreciates. So, that is where we stand. One more. Just so you guys can get an idea of this. Low orbit Kerbin to low orbit Elu is 5,510 meters per second delta V. And back is the same amount. Which means that's about half our fuel. We're burning a lot of fuel already, but we're also not accommodating for the dark side of planets. Because we're going to have to get down and close to some of these planets if we actually want to have a low orbit. Which means at some point, we are going to be burning on the dark side of the planet. Our radioisotope thermoelectric generators can't keep up with that kind of drain. And that is an engineering problem we will never overcome. But that's a problem for another day. Anyway, you guys listened to me talk for about 35 minutes now about the brutal efficiency of this engine. And the fact that we cheated a little bit just to get it to the stats where it is. So, I guess the question is, do you think it's cheating that we modified this engine? Leave your answer in the comments. I am dying to know.
Come and fly away.